Hello, my name is Camry Lowy, and this is for DHH 638, and this is a modification lesson plan for students who are deaf or hard of hearing with the use of amplification and rely on oral teaching. So, for my lesson, I have chosen to do a second grade lesson plan. And to start out with, it's to read a book called If You Were a Verb, and then the end result is for the students to create a book called If I Were a Verb. And so a few of the things that I think are important as far as expectations and behaviors are to make sure that you're writing everything down for the students so that they are aware of what those expectations and behaviors are. Write down the directions on a board, on a piece of paper that you can give them. My learner objectives and outcomes are going to be, just for this group of students that are modified, are follow along using a finger tracking strategy while the teacher reads the book If You Were a Verb, as well as ask for clarification for misheard and misunderstood language, for directions and assignments on the assignment and lesson, as well as develop an understanding of new vocabulary, more specifically verbs. Collaborate between different peers, apply the new vocabulary in creating their own If I Were a Verb storybook, and provide verbs that are appropriate for individuals. I'm sorry, wrong sentence. And then another accommodation or learn outcome would be understand the importance of creating beginning, middle, and end of a story when they're creating one on their own. So, as far as pre-assessment activity goes, they will be reading and discussing in detail If I Were a Verb book using proper amplification in reference to each student's hearing needs. We all know that every student that has different levels of hearing has different amplification that they use. BAHAs, hearing aids, cochlear implants, or they can use actual additional amplification such as sound field systems, integrated receivers, with transmitters, all that fun stuff. So making sure that you're using the correct amplification is always important. Provide visuals, again, through acting, through video, through pictures, through PowerPoints, through books, any way that you possibly can to provide to supplement and support the auditory information that you are providing those students for the lesson. Connecting verbs to their previous background knowledge is also important. Letting them explain what activities they're involved in after school, and then pointing out what those verbs are so that they have a clear understanding that verbs are not just in reading, they're actually in our everyday lives as well. And then, again, providing a written example of what is expected to them after the fact. Everything is due. This is what you want it to look like. As far as differentiation and adaptation and accommodation strategies, modify the verb vocabulary so it fits each student's need. You don't want to give them verbs that are more difficult, or let's say that you actually want to provide them words that have content to them rather than just functioning verbs. So for example, they understand the concept of run. There's a visual that they can connect to that. So you want to make sure that they understand that, as well as repeat comments, questions provided by other students in the classroom. And resources and materials that I'll need is crayons, paper, pencils, pre-stapled If I Were a Verb book, and then if needed, for these students that are still having difficulties, prefabricated sentences within the I Were a Verb book. So sort of like I did for the PSE students, was create a sentence for them and then start with leaving out certain parts and verbs, names, so they can still create their own story, but they still have a beginning, middle, and end, which is something that sometimes students with hearing loss struggle with. But if they understand the verbs, then they'll be able to fill in certain things. So that is one accommodation or modification that I could use, as well as, again, providing visuals through PowerPoints, pictures, dramatic play, acting, things like that. Learner activities include me as a teacher acting out a series of verbs and then having the students determine what those verbs are based on guessing, and then The teacher will then explain exactly what an action and a verb, or what an action word and what a verb is, and how we use them in our daily lives. Once that is completed, the students will be able to get into their small group tables and discuss and come up with other verbs that they can think of. And one of the modifications that I put in there for students that are in an oral class is to use the proper amplification and to place them in small groups. Let's say we consider a small group between 3 and 5. Well, I would say a small group for a student that has amplification needs would be more so like 2 or 3, so you're not competing with as much background noise. Once the students have all finished collaborating, they're going to each give turns to explain what verbs they have come up with, and then have you put them on the board so that they have a visual to reference back to once they are doing their If I Were a Verb book. Again, you're going to want to repeat and rephrase or act out all of the verbs that you have the students repeat back. So, you're going to want to repeat or rephrase or act out all of the verbs that the students are suggesting, so that those students with amplification or hearing aids or etc. will be able to access auditorily a second time to help with the processing as well. Again, if needed, the students that do use this amplification that are deaf or hard of hearing can then use, have you type up the verbs from the board onto the computer and then print that out, so then they have an actual copy to reference back to even at a later date. It's great. The teacher will check for students, let me go back because I am referencing my lesson plan right now. Once you've completed the list of words on the board, then the students will get a graphic organizer, and this graphic organizer is stating a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it helps them to structure the lesson or their story lesson more than anything, making sure that they do have, like I said, the beginning of the story of introducing a character, the middle of the story, creating a problem and then fixing the problem, and then the end, the closure. And then so for this, we'll create a small group instruction with the teacher to help reflect on and use one-on-one instruction for any additional clarification or help, as well as filter out that background noise so the students are able to concentrate, get questions answered, ask questions in a more comfortable setting. Next, we are going to have them, once their graphic organizer is created and it's all done, it's been checked, then we're going to have them use a sentence structure draft, and that looks like this right here. And what this is going to do is, pardon me, I have to pull it up. This is going to allow them to create sentences for each page, and then have myself or an additional aid modify it so that they are able to get help. So it's just kind of a draft of making sure that they have all the proper elements that they need in order to complete their storybook. This is a process of a lesson. It does not just happen in one day. That is one thing I would like to note. Once we review that and that has been completed and that has been passed, then the students will be able to start to work on their book. They will get a book that is blank. They will put a title page. They will have a beginning of the story. So if you could see, if I were a verb, my name would be Jane Jump and Run. And then so they were going to underline all the verbs that they used in the story. Then create a picture as well, so you can kind of see how I have done this. Once this is done, then they will go ahead and present this to the class, or if they feel like they need to, in a small group as well. And then we will discuss and have questions at a later date. Thank you. There is clearly more detail within my lesson plan, and I appreciate your time when looking over my literature lesson plan for students who are in an oral classroom using amplification.